For many fans of Supernatural, the first 5 seasons remain the best in the series. However, the creators of the final season, like me, have their own opinion on how the story of the Winchester brothers should have concluded. Hello, this is Vovchan, and in this video I will try to explain why the 15th season is very good and why the project should not have been closed after Kripke's departure.
Time to get to work.
I will say that I have watched all the seasons, and I have rewatched several times. I agree with those who think the series declined a lot from season 12, but I don't understand how one could include the final season in that assessment. Although it is not perfect, it focuses on what is truly important for the fans, reinterprets the ending, and presents the iconic characters. There were many prerequisites for this. Initially, Kripke did not have a detailed plan for 5 seasons. The series evolved from a Monster of the Week story to a large-scale apocalyptic plot, which ultimately led to the emergence of issues that frustrated fans. The numerous deaths and resurrections of characters, including Castiel, began to lose their significance even during Kripke's time. The finale of the 5th season does not put a period at the end of the brothers' story, leaving many questions unanswered. When I started watching Supernatural, 10 seasons had already been released, and despite the fact that at some point the show had declined, I am still glad that it aired, that it was my weekly investigation. As a longtime viewer who grew up with the series, I understand how challenging the task of the creator in the finale was to conclude a 15-year story and tie all the plot lines together. And he managed to do it. But how? Let's figure it out.
Supernatural TV series.
Let's start with the nice little things and the charming fan service. From the very first episode, iconic ghosts that appeared in the earlier seasons return to the screen. Here is the woman in white who debuted in the first episode of the series, the clown from the beginning of the 2nd season, and Bloody Mary. There are many references and familiar ghosts here, but what is important is that their return does not feel forced or created solely for fan service. It is justified by the plot. In fact, the victory over these ghosts was not that easy. The fact that they dealt with them in just a few episodes speaks only to the experience of the hunters and the coolness of their allies. Among other important references, it is worth mentioning the appearance of the former prophet Kevin, whose presence is justified by the fact that God turned out to be a villain. Also among the justified fan service, you can find Becky, the first demon Lilith, and even the previously caged Michael and Adam. What can be said about the references when in the penultimate episode of the season Lucifer returns, played by Mark Pellegrino? The creators made an effort to give each character, except for the ghosts from the 3 episodes, some tasks and find a reason for their appearance. Lilith turned out to be an ally of God, whom he used to retrieve a weapon capable of wounding him. Michael played a key role in the finale and was needed in the series to better develop Chuck's character. Looking ahead, according to his own words, it was he who created a good reputation for God on Earth, and even after everything Chuck has done, he still remained a devoted son, which shows how much weaker he is compared to Dean, who did not abandon his brother despite their father's instructions. Lucifer turned out to be the only one who knew the truth about God all this time and was just trying to survive in these conditions, although he is full of contradictions. Perhaps all he wanted was his father's love, just like Michael. Overall, most of the references serve their purpose. After several very weak seasons, they quickly set the audience up for the finale. Many of the returning characters are needed here not only as pleasant reminders of the earlier seasons, but also as active participants through whom the creators convey their idea that God has always been the villain. You know, I have never understood the idea of an impartial observer in the context of the supernatural. At least because such a characterization is given to the character Chuck, who is actually God pretending to be a prophet, what is he even doing in the series? Well, that's scary. How much do you charge? Alright, girl. 1 hour, 1,000. Okay, I'll take 20 girls for the whole night, please. No, seriously, why is he portrayed that way? The decision to reveal at the end of the season that Chuck is God is not some sudden twist. It is a premeditated character that does not receive proper development until the very end of the series. And no, I am not going to analyze all his behavior in all subsequent appearances, but I will mention that the criticism of Chuck's writing abilities began long before the finale. Did none of it appeal to you? Even the house. No. And has the abyss opened its mouth? Oh, too melodramatic. You even brought yourself into the narrative, oh my god. Yes, I agree. I got carried away here. In this same episode, Chuck says that he enjoys playing roles. This means that his descent to Earth and the games with the Prophet are the behavior of a bored deity who manipulates people for his own pleasure. And no, it cannot be said that he does not interfere. His very presence as a character, with whom Jack and Dean interact, and the fact that he consciously directed Dean to the place where the final battle was supposed to take place, indicates his intervention. Similarly, he persuades Dean to kill Jack at the end of Season 14, where we learn his true motives. Chuck's behavior until the end of the penultimate season seems strange and inconsistent. The series could not be closed after the 5th or the 11th season, as no episode gave a definitive conclusion to the story of the Winchesters and the overarching plot. And so the decision to make God the main villain kills several birds with one stone. First, they finally find justification for his behavior throughout all the seasons. Second, it explains why Sam goes through the same arcs and apocalypses repeatedly, as the writer turned out to be quite mediocre. And thirdly, it justifies the nonsense of the writers and adds some logic to the events from seasons 12 to 14. In the 4th episode, Chuck visits his longtime fan Becca to seek support in reigniting the spark of a writer within him. However, it turns out that, unlike him, she has moved on with her life. She got rid of her fanaticism towards Winchester, started a family in general, became a better person, and she quickly realizes why Chuck actually came to her. Thus, the writers emphasize the fact that people grow as individuals, while God remains stagnant. Therefore, he continues to manipulate her, saying that he hates himself to evoke pity from Becca. And he succeeds.
She tries to help him and leads him to the thought that the main joy comes from writing stories. Chuck immediately grabs someone else's laptop and writes a draft of the ending. He hopes for support, but she starts to criticize him.
Danger, Chuck. Some weak, unconvincing kind. It's nice to hear the guys' voices, but the story is judged by the villain. And these villains seem not dangerous at all. And then, where's the classic rock? Did they completely forget about the box office? The resolution is kind of lame. The boys are sitting tied up while the villain reads a monologue that, by the way, is also not very impressive.
And this is a very good moment. It feels like the fans of the show are speaking through Becky, criticizing everything that has happened with the project since the 5th season. This infuriates Chuck and leads him to write a much harsher ending. Becky is horrified by this, and we once again learn the true nature of God. In episode 12, God finds a new listener in an electronics store and reveals that he has done something similar with the Winchesters in parallel worlds many times before. He forced Sam and Dean to kill each other multiple times for his ending and says that they were indeed his toys, which no longer bring him joy. From this scene, we understand that it is these Winchesters who have always been special, the only ones who could resist the will of God. And it has always been this way, as the archangels from this world helped to imprison Amara. And nothing like that could happen with the other Winchesters. After Chuck finished pouring out his soul, we realize that he began to destroy other worlds, all because he doesn't know how to fix his mistakes, which he has never been able to fix. Most of the problems that God faced, he solved in the same way as with the angels. He abandoned them, locked them away, renounced them. He renounced the Leviathans he had created and locked them in purgatory. He renounced his sister and Lucifer's son and locked them in a cage. Therefore, it is not surprising that by the end of the series, he renounces humanity as well and begins to miss his stories. When Amara offers Chuck to unite for the sake of a single world to achieve the true balance that it was always meant to be, we indeed understand that Chuck is obviously not interested. A subtle thread in the series was the idea that Chuck shouldn't be God. He shouldn't decide who lives and who dies. His creations were able to become better than he is. And it is not surprising that in the finale, Jack takes his place. How could the son of Lucifer, possessing both a soul and the grace of an archangel, take his place? God who understands humans because he was one of them. God who knows what it is like to be without a soul. God, understanding the true nature of his being. And it is only through one short, rather straightforward monologue that we are made to understand all of this.
Jack wrote himself into the story. That was his mistake. But I learned from you. Umama and the body command. They can do it. This is what you need to believe in.
After this episode, I realized that the main goal of the Winchesters was to help the world indeed truly find a new God, one that it deserved from the very beginning. Do you remember how the concept of heaven was presented in the supernatural universe? Essentially, it resembles Groundhog Day, where people relive their best memories day after day. And it seems to me that this is no better, and perhaps even worse than hell, which has always been a continuation of life. For after death, people suffered, tormented by executioners, and at some point, a twisted human soul could become a demon. But at least it symbolized a new beginning, the circle of life. It could even be a second chance for a person. But heaven, being an infinite loop of memories, even if pleasant, did not resemble a place where Sam and Dean could one day reunite. In the final season, this was decided to be revisited. Jack, taking the place of God, changed heaven, so people could live in it, to live as on earth. Therefore, it is especially pleasant to learn that John and Mary have finally reunited. It seems to me that in such a world, death has ceased to be something frightening. After all, good people have begun to receive a true afterlife rather than a pale imitation of it. Not only heaven began to change,
After Raven ended up in hell and became its queen, she started to change it for the better. She abolished deals with demons, believing that people will end up in hell in sufficient numbers anyway, and plans other changes. As a result, hell and heaven will no longer affect human affairs and let them live their lives and make their own mistakes. God will no longer play with the fates of people for his own stories. And there will be no one to endow the plot armor that the brothers had throughout the entire series. This brings us to the question of how Sam and Dean were able to defeat the omnipresent and all-powerful God. Let's start by noting back in the 5th season, we were given a hint about this. Death said one day he would take God himself. It makes a bit of sense the creators of the show decided to lead to such a conclusion, using an idea from those seasons considered sacred canon. I should also remind you that in one of the episodes, Dean kills Death, after which the next deceased Reaper can become the new Death. Many people didn't like this, but it's really cool, as Death in the series is presented not so much as a being, but as a concept, as an idea, and an idea cannot be killed. Therefore, Chuck in the series can die or pass all his abilities to someone else, as it is possible that God, like Death, can take on another form. Even being God, Chuck is limited by the world he created. After all, he is still somewhat bound by his own rules. In the 2nd episode, it is evident that God and Sam are connected because Sam shot Chuck with the weapon that God gave him to kill Jack, and he cannot simply break this connection with his power. Therefore, such a paradox as Jack, being a Nephilim, indeed possessed a unique nature and powers that made him an exception to the usual rules of life in the supernatural world. Per the original idea, he was supposed to become a supernova, capable of destroying God and the darkness. The plan was good, as Jack was purposefully gaining strength by following Billy's instructions. The rib of Adam, which became the catalyst for the explosion and contained a spark of God, was supposed to allow him to kill them. But because Sam realized the wrong path, they changed and Billy sent Jack. Finally, he explodes but doesn't kill the darkness or himself. It's likely he couldn't kill Chuck and Amara this way. It can be said that Jack has become something like a failed supernova, collapsing into a black hole for divine powers, which the series specifically began to demonstrate through the wilting flowers around him. During the battle between Lucifer and Michael, Jack absorbed a large amount of power, and as a result of their clash, he began to absorb divine energy even faster. If he is certainly considered as an analog of a black hole, then as his powers increase, so does the rate of absorption. And when Chuck was visibly beating the brothers with his hands, Jack only needed to be nearby, for that was enough to soon absorb power even from the creator. Moreover, it is worth noting that Chuck deprived them of their only narrative armor by taking away their supernatural luck. For example, they never had toothaches or their car broke down without good reason. The series dedicates 2 episodes to this moment, and not without reason. Firstly, it humanizes the Winchesters and explains how they managed to survive everything that happened to them as ordinary people. They not only lose their luck, but they also lose confidence in themselves and cannot understand what they have experienced that was real. Secondly, this forces them to find a way to regain that luck. Throughout the entire episode, they try to win it from the pagan goddess Fortune and lose. But they still receive what they came for, as Fortune saw in them true heroes capable of risking everything for the sake of others. These 2 episodes were necessary in the series to show how the brothers break free from Chuck's influence and begin to control their own fate. But I fear that the luck they have gained is not nearly equal to what they have lost. This is important, but more on that later. Let's focus on why this became possible in the first place. At the 9th minute in the last episode, Chuck says he didn't write on the relationship between Amara and Dean. And in the 9th episode, he says that he is merely manipulating events to push the heroes towards the actions he desires. This indicates that despite all his omnipotence, he enjoys playing with destinies. He wants his heroes to make the decision he is pushing them towards. Chuck made Sam lose hope by showing him future scenarios in which they kill him, which severed their bond. Now comes the most important revelation about the supernatural God. Are you ready? The essence is that he has no grand plan and never did. Even his idea to make Sam and Dean suffer by leaving them on an empty planet doesn't work, just because he absolutely needs to intervene. He says that he is bored watching them. And that's true. He is blinded by his ego. He believes he has already won, that nothing can threaten him. And even being God, even having the ability to know everything about everything, he blindly falls for the trick of the Winchesters. He simply finds it uninteresting to be wise and observe the world from God's perspective. He wants to be a direct participant in the events. And it was like that from his very first appearance. With each new season in which he participated, his influence on events only grew. And when he decided to take down the Winchesters with his own hands, he fell as a person. At that moment, Chuck ceased to be God. He ultimately became nothing more than an arrogant and self-absorbed being. He became so engrossed in his role as a puppeteer that he failed to notice he had become a puppet himself.
It is human flaws, not divine essence, that determine Chuck's fate. It was the personal qualities and principles of the Winchesters, as people, that helped them defeat God himself, who, despite possessing all the power in the world, remained blind. I have just reviewed most of the series, and fans probably had the fewest complaints about this part. Most people were upset specifically about the events of the last episode, and I don't understand that. After all, it makes sense no matter how you look at it. Everything that happened earlier with Dean and Sam led to something like this.
You have dreamed of living in a town like this since childhood? Quiet.
Normal. They are normal for us.
Remember, the story began. Dean came to find his brother, who ran away from the hunt seeking a normal life. In the 15 years that they traveled the country together, Sam had almost convinced himself that he was not worthy of it. The brothers took on the burden of responsibility for all humanity. It is logical that at the end of the story, Sam receives exactly what he once aspired to, fulfilling his destiny. Dean doubted that their lives had meaning when he learned that he and his brother were puppets in someone else's story. But the truth is that they were still themselves. All this time they were searching for their path, despite the fact that they were always expected to be different. The refusal to follow instructions and their solution led them to physical liberation from the influence of God and to moral liberation. The truth is that Dean never knew an ordinary life, but he always longed to try it. In the series, his desire for a simple and happy life is reflected in his wish to eat pie, which embodies comfort, safety, and those rare moments of peace that are lacking in his life as a hunter. He rarely managed to enjoy the desired pie, just as he rarely could touch the normal life that always seemed unattainable to him. At the end of the series, Dean finds himself at a pie festival, seemingly the perfect embodiment of his dream. But it is here, symbolically receiving the very life he has always dreamed of, that Dean meets his demise. This tragic irony emphasizes the idea that Dean, despite all his desires, was never meant for a normal life in any way, unlike Sam. But let me try to explain purely technically why Dean died from a nail during a regular hunt. As I mentioned earlier, the luck granted by fortune is incomparable to what Chuck provided them. And this is not my assumption. Dean and Sam felt it, and this was emphasized at the end of episode 11.
Not Hercules' fortune, just a bunch of nonsense.
Well, we didn't win the lottery, but at least the car is in good shape. The credit cards are working. Oh, and a couple of double cheeseburgers with bacon didn't kill you, so...
By the way, it was absolutely magnificent. And she could have thrown us a bit more luck.
She believes we are heroes, and heroes do not seek easy paths. Gods.
And that is why it was important. By the end of the 19th episode, Sam and Dean lost either all or most of their fortune. From now on, nothing protected them from death. There was neither an angel friend who could quickly patch them up, nor a god who writes their story. And it's no surprise that taking life into their own hands, they immediately faced a harsh reality. It doesn't matter what caused Dean's death, whether it was a nail or a bullet. It is important that there is no more worthy way for a person who has dedicated his entire life to protecting others to die. Death in the hunt is quite natural for someone who has always been ready for something like this. In the finale, Kripke has a small monologue. Chuck says that Sam and Dean made their choice and they chose family. But what does this choice mean? How is it shown? Isn't the promise to save his brother and the torment over his death a choice for Dean? Are they going against God? No. I have the feeling that these words relate to the series finale much more than they relate to Kripke's finale. For in it, they truly went against God and chose family. Note what kind of people the brothers were at the end of the series. Dean was not ready to let go of his brother.
Take good care of you. It was kind of my job. Even more than that. It is my essence. But you are no longer a child, Sam. And I shouldn't treat you like a child. Maybe it's time for me to grow up.
The fact that he acknowledged it and said so does not mean accepting his fate. It is merely the beginning of personal growth. That is why, when Sam ends up in the cage, Dean cannot let him go, despite promises not to try to bring him back. Despite his attempts to live a normal life, he still cannot allow his brother to rot in hell, as he still feels that he is obligated to take care of him. Therefore, only in the final season, after defeating God, after he takes fate into his own hands, and after heaven becomes heaven, is he truly ready to let go of his brother. After all, he did everything so that Isam could live the life he deserves, and that's why Isam gains complete freedom. Now he is no longer running from family in an attempt to live normally. He receives his brother's blessing and realizes that he deserves to have both. For the first time in 15 years, they were ready to let each other go. That is why Dean's death was as grounded as possible. It is revealed through a regular dialogue between the brothers, drawing parallels between the first and last episodes. This is where the difference lies. At the end of the 5th season, the brothers were still not ready to accept their fate and let each other go, clinging to their roles as older and younger brother. I believe it is their growth as characters that makes the ending so touching and personal. After all, Dean's death is not a tragedy but a natural conclusion to his journey. To achieve this, the global plot and the finale of the brothers receive separate episodes. There is no way to combine them into one. Throughout his life, Dean managed to kill Azazel, Hitler, and even death itself. He, along with his brother, triumphed over God himself. So the series finally decides to stop escalating events and focuses on what has always mattered most, namely the relationships between people. The series finale is a triumph of the human spirit, a story of personal growth and the strength of family bonds. And ultimately, this is what makes Supernatural such a special and beloved series for many fans.